Welcome to the Devils Are podcast, where we welcome little devils in our heads and explore the depths of our minds at the break of dawn. I am your host, Mao. Hi everyone! Welcome back sa ating podcast. It is the 5th episode and hindi kami makapaniwala na aabot pa ng 5 episodes tong podcast na to. But hopefully, marami pang episodes na parating and you will stick with us sa mga susunod pang episodes. But with that being said, we will move on to today's episode, which is dealing with life, coping styles, and mechanisms. So, ayun, alam naman natin lahat siguro na meron tayong mga iba't ibang coping styles and mechanisms. Pero, ano nga ba yung pinanggagalingan ng mga coping mechanisms na to? Bakit ba nabubuo or nasasanay tayo na gamitin itong mga coping mechanisms na to sa mga problema natin sa buhay? Some might say that some coping mechanisms are more toxic than the other. Pero bakit ba, saan ba nagsistem itong mga toxic na coping mechanisms na to? Bakit ba natin kailangan ng coping mechanisms? And bakit ba some people might say na tinatakasan natin yung problema natin through these coping mechanisms? Pero in this episode, we will focus on knowing what is coping mechanisms and why do we need coping mechanisms. So, a little disclaimer lang guys before we start this episode. I am not a psychology professional or hindi ko psychology yung major in college even. So, lahat ng panggagalingan ng mga information na sasabihin ko ngayon or babasahin ko or panggagalingan ng opinions ko ay galing lahat sa mga articles na ililink namin sa description and sa mga personal experiences ko in researching about mental health and psychology. So, ayun. I hope if meron man akong masabi na mga maling information dito, you can correct me in the comments or in our social media even. And hopefully matama ko yung mga maling information na lalabas dito sa podcast na to. But with that being said, meron pa kaming isang disclaimer for today's episode because sa tingin namin, merong mga triggering topics na matatakal in this episode. So, we listed down the trigger warnings and subjects that might trigger people and might be a bit sensitive for people to talk about. So, please check out the description below if sa tingin nyo merong mga subjects in this podcast na matitrigger yung mental health nyo or makaka-apekto sa mental health nyo. And please check out the timestamps that you needed to avoid or skip in this episode para, ayun, we just want to make you comfortable in watching this episode with us. So with that being said, we will move on to today's episode and ayun, gaya ng sabi ko kanina, I am not a professional when it comes to human psychology and mental health, pero I have done my personal research about mental health. Pero kahit ganon, hindi ko pa din, di ako nagde-dive deep sa coping mechanisms at all because wala lang. I think siguro hindi naging interest ko yun over the years. Pero we are talking about it now. And to be honest, I am quite curious and interested to see kung bakit ba natin kailangan yung coping mechanisms overall and bakit ba merong mga taong nagsasabi na coping mechanisms is just a way to run away from our problems and all of that. Pero kailangan natin yung coping mechanisms eh. I really believe that we need coping mechanisms because hindi naman all the time kaya natin harapin yung mga problema natin agad-agad. And we need coping mechanisms to relieve the stress from all of the problems that we have. Pero hopefully, in this episode, we will answer the question, why do we need to have coping mechanisms? And saan pa nanggagaling tong coping mechanisms na to? So, bago natin sagutin yung tanong na, why do we need coping mechanisms? We have to know first what is coping mechanisms and we have to understand na kung ano nga ba tong coping mechanisms na to. So, meron tayong isang article dito about coping mechanisms and if you want to read with us or to read the articles that we reference in this episode, those will be linked down below too, and lahat ng mga pinanggalingan ng mga information and yung mga personal research namin for this episode will be linked down below. So you can check those out after this episode or while listening to this episode. And so ayan. So the first reference that we have here is from goodtherapy.org, and sabi nila dito, coping mechanisms are the strategies people often use in the face of stress and or trauma to help manage painful or difficult emotions. Coping mechanisms can help people adjust to the stressful events while helping them maintain their emotional well-being. So, right off the bat, sinabi agad sa atin na ginagawa natin itong coping mechanism na to deal with stress and to help us in dealing with our problems and nang hindi naapektuhan yung mental health natin ng malala. So, what are coping mechanisms? Significant life events, whether positive or negative, can cause psychological stress. That is true. Difficult events such as divorce, miscarriage, the death of a loved one, or a loss of a job can cause most people to feel grief or distress. But even events that are considered positive by many, getting married, having a child, and buying a home, can lead to a significant amounts of stress. To adjust this stress, people may utilize some combination of behavior, thought, and emotion depending on the situation. So, hindi lang naman pala natin ginagawa itong mga coping mechanisms na to deal with negative experiences, pero ginagamit din natin siya to deal with the stressful events kahit positive pa yon. So, I want to talk about that for a second, of course. Kasi 'di ba, parang may mga ibang tao kasi na inconsiderate sa mga events sa buhay mo. Like, for example, we are graduating college, ganyan, and we are going to start a career. Syempre, it can be, of course, graduating can be a positive event. Sino ba namang ayaw graduate, di ba? Pero, ayun, it can be stressful eh. Talaga, it can be stressful eh. Kasi, first of all, you are graduating. And, of course, what comes before graduating is finals, ganyan, di ba? Pero, what comes after graduating, hindi mo alam. Kasi, hindi mo alam kung makakuha ka agad ng trabaho or hindi mo alam kung meron bang naghihintay sa yung career or tama ba tong career na pinasok mo or makukuha mo ba tong dream job na gusto mo sa buhay, di ba? And it can be stressful. Pero may mga ibang tao na sa tingin nila you are being ungrateful for the things that you have and the things that you're experiencing. So, ayun, I just wanted to talk about that for a second because hindi natin alam kung paano dinideal ng mga tao sa paligid natin yung mga events sa buhay nila. So, I guess we have to be more considerate in how we talk to people about these stressors na meron sila. Lalo na when it can be a huge deal for them and we think na, of course, hindi naman ako magiging hypocrite and sasabihin ko na perfect ako ganyan, hindi ko to ginagawa sa ibang tao. Pero, ayun, I guess we just have to be mindful in the things that we say to people. Lalo na, hindi lahat ng tingin natin na positive events can be as positive sa mga ibang tao. Hindi lahat ng mga hindi mabigat sa atin ay hindi na mabigat sa mga ibang tao. We might think na ay hindi, kaya niya yan. Maliit na bagay lang yan. Ganyan. Bakit siya na-stress about that? Simpleng-simple lang naman na bagay na yun. Pero, you have to take in consideration na we deal with stress differently and that hindi tayo pare-parehas ng mental capacity to deal with these problems. So, ayun lang. Just a PSA reminder for you and for me din. Ayun. But anyway, moving on to our podcast. Something about coping mechanisms na I was interested about is ano nga ba yung mga types ng coping mechanisms or meron bang types ng coping mechanisms? Because we all know na maraming mga coping styles and mechanisms na nandyan sa mundo and iba't iba tayo ng mga ginagawa to deal with our problems. Pero saan ba nag-i-stem itong mga coping mechanisms na to? Ano bang pinanggagalingan niya? And how do people categorize toxic and good coping mechanisms from each other? So, sabi dito sa reference natin, coping styles can be problem-focused, also called instrumental or emotion-focused. Problem-focused coping strategies are typically associated with methods of dealing with the problem in order to reduce stress, while emotion-focused mechanisms can help people handle any feelings of distress that result from the problem. So dealing with the problem in order to reduce stress, while emotion-focused mechanisms focus on handling the feelings of distress. So, siguro yung problem focus mas tinutulungan niya yung tao na isolve yung problema agad-agad. Habang yung mga emotion-based na mechanism siguro tinutulungan lang niya na wag mag-spiral sa dangerous territory sa mental health nila or makaapekto yung problem nila sa mental health nila and all of that. Di ko alam kasi parang, di ba, hindi mo naman masasabi kung para saan mo ba ginagawa itong coping mechanism na to. I mean, some of us might be not aware that we are doing these coping mechanisms at all and that we are dealing stress through these coping mechanisms. Pero, siguro most of the time, I use emotion-based coping mechanisms because siguro feeling ko lang parang mas gusto ko na pag tinatakal ko yung problem or tinatry kong isolve yung problem na meron ako, I want to have a clearer mindset and that I want to deal with it pag okay na ako sa mental health ko. Ganon, siguro. Sabi din dito sa article na to, coping mechanisms can be broadly categorized as active or avoidant. Active coping mechanisms usually involve an awareness of the stressor and conscious attempts to reduce stress. Avoidant coping mechanisms, on the other hand, are categorized by ignoring or otherwise avoiding the problem. So, siguro naintindihan naman natin lahat yun. And siguro, meron tayong mga active coping mechanisms and meron tayong mga avoidant coping mechanisms. So, for example, nung senior high ako nung high school siguro ako, siguro active coping mechanism sa akin is yung mag-aral na mag-aral. While yung avoidant coping mechanism siguro sa akin is to be honest, parang ang hirap kasing sabihin na ito yung mga avoidant coping mechanisms to because siguro para sa akin personally, the avoidant coping mechanisms is somewhat bad or quote-unquote the bad or toxic coping mechanisms because you are technically running away from the problem and avoiding the problem hanggang sa kaya mo nang or hanggang sa ma-resolve niya na yung sarili niya or kaya mo na siyang maharap. Pero siguro yung avoidant or one avoidant coping mechanism sa akin is that I spend time on other things rather than doing or dealing with my problem. Kung nga, sabihin natin na marami akong problema or I have a ton of schoolworks, ganyan. But I want to not do my schoolworks, for example. Siguro sa akin, yung avoidant coping mechanism ko is to not focus on doing my workload but to focus on something else. Kung nga watch a movie or listen to a podcast or listen to an album, ganyan. Kahit alam ko na tomorrow, I will still have this workload and all of this schoolwork na hindi naman mare-resolve yung sarili niya. But, meron din silang nilista dito na types of coping mechanisms based on adaptive coping mechanisms and avoidant coping mechanisms. Sorry. And ayun, naglista sila dito ng 5 adaptive coping mechanisms. Number 1 is support. Talking about stressful event with a supportive person can be an effective way to manage stress. Seeking external support instead of self-isolating and internalizing the effects of stress can greatly reduce the negative effects of a difficult situation. So, one example right off the bat ng support na under ng adaptive coping mechanism is siguro talking to your friends, kanyan. Siguro having a friendly date with your close friends and talking about your problems to them. And ngayong college, siguro I have spent a lot of time doing this because I enjoy or I appreciate those moments na nakikipag-usap ko lang sa mga kaibigan mo about these problems. And ayun, parang kahit minsan, alam mo yun, parang iiyak ka because sa heavy or kung gaano kabigat itong mga problema na to, and you just keep on thinking na hindi mo na ma-resolve itong mga problema na to, nakakagaan ng loob na you will know that people will listen to you and listen to your problems kahit technically hindi naman ma-resolve yung problem na yun. Of course, dahil sabi nga nila, hindi naman dahil sinabi mo itong mga problema na to or you speak out the problems to the world ay ma-resolve na yung problema. That's just not how the world works, unfortunately. Pero siguro kasi nakakagaan ng loob na malaman mo na merong mga taong may pakialam, ganun siguro, na merong mga taong tutulungan kang i-resolve itong mga problema na to, and merong mga taong makikinig. And number 2 naman sa mga types ng coping mechanisms na under yung adaptive, relaxation. Any number of relaxing activities can help people cope with stress. Relaxing activities may include practicing meditation, progressive muscle relaxation, or other calming techniques, sitting in nature, or listening to soft music. Siguro personally, I don't have this type of coping mechanism because pag may problema siguro ako, parang gusto ko parang nadidistract ako sa problema na yun. And listening to soft music is of course relaxing, ganyan. Pero meron lang akong certain mood na gusto ko ng tahimik, ganyan, or gusto ko ng hindi clouded yung utak ko ng mga ibang thoughts other than my problems, ganyan. Pero kayo, ano ba yung mga types ng relaxation na coping mechanisms na nag-work para sa inyo? Kasi personally, parang kung may mga tao na nakikinig sila ng ASMR para i-ground yung sarili nila and para mag-take a break, ganyan, sa life overall, and to deal with their stress and to release that stress through listening to ASMR or softly speaking, ganyan-ganyan. Pero, ewan ko, personally, parang hindi ako naging interested overall in that because I find it creepy sometimes, to be honest. And sabi nila, makakatulong daw yung ASMR sa sleeping problems and the problems that are associated or like sleeping problems. Pero, ewan ko, pag tinatry ko kasi mag-ASMR or makinig sa ASMR, I haven't tried ASMR. Parang, pag nakikinig kasi ako sa ASMR, parang I keep on focusing sa sinasabi nila rather than their calming voice. And, ewan ko, parang mas na-stress ako or I guess mas, parang hindi ako nag-ground, which is the, of course, yun yung trabaho ng ASMR, na i-ground ka sa, or pahintuin or i-pause, ganyan, yung stress mo or yung araw mo, ganyan. Pero para sa akin, parang wala lang, parang normal lang siya speaking, and that it honestly just weirds me out, ganun. Pero anyway, if you are relaxed by ASMR overall, and that is okay too. Iba-iba naman tayo ng ways to deal with stress. But ayun, the number 3 type ng adaptive coping mechanisms is problem solving. This coping mechanism involves identifying a problem that is causing stress and then developing and putting into action some potential solutions for effectively managing it. Wow. So, siguro this is just the head-on solving the problem and thinking of how to solve the problem. Personally, sa tingin ko, hindi ako ganong tao because pag sobrang bigat ng problema ko, I will just try to avoid it for a second dahil, syempre, diba nakaka-apekto din sa mental headspace natin yung mga problema na yan, and to think na hindi ako magpo-pause to even relax myself for a second or to take a break from solving the problem or trying to solve the problem, that will be stressful for me siguro. Kaya siguro hindi ko mostly ginagamit yung problem solving na type ng coping mechanism sa everyday problems ko, ganun. Pero siguro parang it is beneficial to have this type of coping mechanism, or if kung ganito ka mag-cope with your problems, siguro it will be beneficial because you are facing the problem head on and you are constantly thinking of ways to solve your problem nang hindi naapektuhan yung mental health mo ng malala, ganyan. Pero siguro we just have to think, of course, then na not every problem can be solved immediately, and sometimes you have to take a step back and to pause for a second to try to think of the situation and try to think of a way na marerelax ka, ganun. Kahit siguro sabihin natin na for 1 hour, ganyan. Kung nga it's finals week, and of course, that's stressful. Iniisip ko pala na i-stress na ako. Pero, di ba isipin natin, if you are a student, alam mo naman na, syempre mag-aaral ka everyday, and most of your time will be spent studying and reviewing, ganyan. Pero, every once in a while, siguro kailangan natin mag-pause in dealing with or in solving the problem, which is the finals week, and wanting to have a good grade by relaxing ourselves or eating a good meal or parang maglakad sa labas, ganyan, to ground ourselves and to pause for a second para hindi ma-fry yung utak natin kaka-solve ng problema. Ganon. Personally, parang ayun lang iniisip ko kasi ayun nga, parang ang hirap kasi na itatakal mo agad yung problem eh. Parang para sa akin ganon. Parang ang hirap na agad-agad i-face mo yung problem na yun. But if it works for you, it works for you. Hindi naman natin sinasabi na mali yan, dapat mag-take ka ng break, ganyan. Pero if it works for you, it works for you. Personally, it just doesn't work for me. And I just want to say na it is okay to solve the problem agad-agad. Pero it is okay to take a break and to think about it for a second. Pero, ayun, whatever works for you, of course, that works for you. But moving on, pang-apat dito sa ating adaptive coping mechanisms is humor. Making light of a stressful situation will help people maintain perspective and prevent the situation from becoming overwhelming. So, siguro sa lahat ng to, sunod sa support siguro, humor na yung madalas kong ginagamit, especially with my college friends, ganyan. Kasi 'di ba parang Parang iniisip ko pa lang, parang nakakatawa na. Kasi, lagi kami nagjo-joke around na tinatawanan lang namin lagi yung problema namin. Which is, kapag narinig mo parang toxic, of course. Pero, I can't justify it, of course. Pero kasi parang pag naging seryoso ka sa mga bagay-bagay lagi, parang mas lalo na makakadagdag sa problema mo, ganun. And personally, yung mga college friends ko, siguro, and yung mga friends ko overall, siguro mas gusto namin na i-take yung situation in a lighter perspective kahit most of the time naman it doesn't work out that way. With that being said, we will move on to the last type ng coping mechanism na under ng adaptive, which is physical activity. Exercise can serve as a natural and healthy form of stress relief. Running, yoga, swimming, walking, dance, team sports, and many other physical activities can help people cope with stress and the after effects of traumatic events. Sabi nga nila, di ba, parang may nabasa akong article dati na yung exercise daw, nagre-release siya ng happy hormones, and that's why it helps us to relieve stress. Personally kasi, I think I like walking a lot, and wala lang, it helps me calm my mind. Lalo na pag I'm overthinking things again, and that I'm overthinking my problem and trying to solve my problem agad-agad, ganyan. Pero sa tingin ko kasi parang it personally is not for me, lalo na exercise, because nagiging toxic din siya para sa akin, lalo na nung siguro lalo na nung high school or nung senior high school, because I depended on exercise para to relieve my stress, because ayun nga, nalaman ko na exercising has this parang good effect on people's mental health, and merong certain na dopamine ba? Basta ayun, may certain na chemical na release or is associated with exercise na nakakatulong in coping with problems and mental health problems overall. And ayun, naging dependent ako sa exercise, which just exhausted me, to be honest. And wala, ngayon parang naglalakad na lang ako ng mahaba pag I want to think about something nang hindi ako nako-compromise, or that my safety will not be compromised and my physical health, of course, will not be compromised. Pero para sa ibang tao, meron silang mga certain ways ng coping with their problems, like jogging, ganyan, like exercising again, and that helps them, of course. And nung mga years naman na I depended on exercise as a coping mechanisms, it really helped me a lot in dealing with problems, of course. Pero ayun, I have to take that out of my system because I was too dependent on it. Pero ayun nga yung point eh. The coping mechanisms can be harmful to us. Lahat naman siguro ng coping mechanisms can be harmful to us pag naging dependent na tayo sa kanila. And especially, lalo na yung mga maladaptive coping mechanisms or yung mga avoidant coping mechanisms na nakalista din yung mga types dito. And number 1 sa mga types ng common maladaptive coping mechanisms is escape. To cope with anxiety or stress, some people may withdraw from friends and become socially isolated. They may absorb themselves in a solitary activity such as watching television, reading, or spending time online. Personally, I have experienced this, and hindi naman natin siya siguro kailangan i-take as a negative. I mean, most of us, kailangan natin ng time para sa sarili natin, ganyan. And that, we have to understand that our problems are maybe not as heavy as people think it is. And it is tiring to hear that kaya mo yan, parang maliit na bagay lang yan para sa'yo. You can deal with that agad-agad. And of course, it is tiring to hear that all the time, lalo na pag you are struggling with this problem. And I think the escape type of coping mechanisms is a great way to dealing with people or escaping from people na you just want to take a break for a second from all of the happenings na nangyayari sa buhay natin. And of course, I can see why it is toxic because hindi natin alam kung hanggang kailan natin i-isolate yung sarili natin sa mga tao na to. And meron ako nabasa recently na story na because of a traumatic experience, this is fiction by the way. I don't really read a lot of non-fiction, lalo na pag traumatic experience because ayun, parang sobrang bigat lang yun para sa akin. Recently, I am not reading those type. Pero anyway, ayun, meron akong nabasa na book recently na it's not really a book but a PDF ganyan. Pero it is a fictional story na one of the characters may nangyaring traumatic experience sa kanya. And because of that, he didn't want to parang ayaw niya receive ng pity or ng mga mata na naawa sa kanya, ganyan. And because of that, he isolated himself from his friends and all of the people na may pakialam or nag-care sa kanya, ganyan. Pero nakakilala siya, of course, ng loved one na paparamdam sa kanya na it is okay to not talk about your problem head on, and that to not think of you as a fragile person but a strong person because na-experience mo tong traumatic event sa buhay mo and you are still here with us today. So you are not something or you are not someone to take pity on, but you are someone to see as a strong person dahil na nandito ka ngayon. Siguro nakarelate din ako dun sa story na yon because sometimes you just don't want to hear or actively listen to people na naawa sa'yo. Of course, hindi naman natin sinasabi na pity is a bad thing or that thinking about our friends or caring about our friends kapag naka-experience sila ng traumatic event or kahit a problem in their life, hindi naman masama na maawa tayo sa kanila. Pero sometimes that's just not siguro hindi lang yun yung kailangan ng mga tao na yun at the moment. Hindi na kailangan ng awa. Hindi na kailangan ng those pity messages or those pity eyes or overall just hindi na kailangan ng mga tao maawa sa kanila. Alam nila na things are fucked up. Alam nila na nasa masamang headspace sila and nasa masamang situation sila. Pero I guess we just have to be supportive more. And of course, hindi naman sinasabi na alisin natin sa sistema natin na magsabi ng mga supportive words and that magpakita ng awa sa mga taong nahihirapan. Pero sometimes that's just not what people need eh. Parang they just want support ng hindi binibring up na nasa fuck up situation sila kasi alam na nila yon and they know that they know how heavy their problem is. I'm guessing they know how heavy their problem is most of the time. Pero ayun, parang hindi kasi dapat, I mean, not most of the time we need to express yung awa na yon, because it can be tiring to see na naawa yung mga tao sa'yo. Parang maawa ka na lang din sa sarili mo, ganyan. So I guess we have to somehow lift up their mood more and to encourage them to na kaya nilang harapin yung mga problema na yun. Pero of course, hindi naman natin agad-agad magagawa yun, and ayun, parang ang hirap gawin nung mga sinabi ko, because our first move is to express how sorry we are for them. Pero siguro ayun, we have to practice that, na encourage natin sila na kaya nila yan, and all of that, nang hindi pinapakita na naawa tayo sa kanila, because eventually maawa na lang din sila sa sarili nila. And of course, we know that self-pity does not look good on anyone. But anyway, yung second na type ng maladaptive coping mechanism is unhealthy self-soothing. Some self-soothing behaviors are healthy in moderation, but may turn into an unhealthy addiction if it becomes a habit to use them to self-soothe. Some examples of unhealthy soothing could include overeating, binge drinking, and excessive use of internet or video games. So, meron ako nabasa na isa pang article na will be linked down below as well. Of course, meron, sabi niya doon, a lot of these coping mechanisms can be an addiction. Lalo na yung mga, of course, yung binge eating, yung drinking alcohol, yung smoking to relieve stress, even caffeine to relieve stress. Drinking caffeine to relieve stress can lead to addiction too. Pero, ayun, ginagawa kasi siya ng mga tao to, of course, gaya nga na sabi ko, to relieve stress. Pero, hindi siguro natin masasabi kung kailan huminto, or siguro nahihirapan yung mga taong to na huminto from these coping mechanisms, because ito na lang yung nakikita nila na way to relieve their stress. And marami akong kakilala na mga tao na nagsusmoke pag merong problema, and that umiinom pag merong problema. And I can say that I am not one of those people na pag merong heavy na problema, I would want to drink a couple of to down a couple of cups of alcohol, ganyan. Pero siguro nagiging toxic talaga siya if you, again, depend on it. Every problem that arises, maglasing ka, or that every problem that arises, you will smoke 2 packs, or ano bang tawag doon? 2 packs of cigarettes, ganyan. And this unhealthy soothing habits din siguro dito isa din to sa mga cause ng mga iba't ibang mental health problems na alam natin, such as eating disorders, or addiction sa alcohol, or addiction sa smoking, or addiction to anything at all na nagre-relieve ng stress sa atin. Because some people siguro hindi nila alam mag-cope sa mga problema nang hindi ginagawa tong mga unhealthy self-soothing habits na to. But anyway, meron tayong pangatlong coping mechanism dito under maladaptive, which is numbing. Some self-soothing behaviors may become numbing behaviors. When a person engages in a numbing behavior, they are often aware of what they are doing and may seek out an activity that will help them drown or override their distress. People may seek to numb their stress by eating junk food, excessive alcohol use, or using drugs. So siguro masasabi natin na yung unhealthy self-soothing, level 1 siya, ganyan. And then yung numbing, that is the worst, parang level 2, parang mas mabigat na problema na harapin natin pag nag-rely tayo sa mga unhealthy self-soothing coping mechanisms rather. Ayun. So, gaya ng sabi dito, numbing. Siguro, personally, siguro masasabi ko na itong mga numbing coping mechanisms na to, ito yung mga ginagamit kapag ayaw mo na lang makaramdam or ayaw mo na lang isipin yung problema overall, ganyan. And that includes drinking or being fixated on something else rather than your problem, ganyan. Pero siguro gaya ng sabi ko kanina sa unhealthy self-soothing coping mechanisms, the people that use these types of coping mechanisms, siguro they rely on these coping mechanisms because first of all, they don't know how to solve their problem, or number two, they got used to coping with stress and coping with problems this way. And kapag sobrang bigat na ng problema, ito na lang yung tinatakbahan nila, kumbaga ganun. And siguro hindi natin mabe-blame yung mga tao na yun na ganun yung ginagawa nila, because sabi nga dito sa mga articles na nire-reference natin, yung coping mechanisms kasi tinutulungan niya tayo na mag-deal with the stress that we have. And over time, we got used to dealing with stress by using these coping mechanisms. And if na-build up na sa personality mo na if you have a really big problem, you will rely on, let's say, excessive use of internet or binge drinking or overeating or using drugs even or all of that, over time, parang yun na lang din yung kakapitan mo kasi yun na lang yung alam mo na makaka-relieve ng stress mo, ganyan. And number 4 dito sa list ng mga maladaptive coping mechanisms is compulsions and risk-taking. Stress can cause some people to seek an adrenaline rush through compulsive or risk-taking behaviors such as gambling, unsafe sex, experimenting with drugs, theft, or reckless driving. Personally, I don't know, siguro I don't know people na may excessively use this type of coping mechanisms, pero I have heard stories about let's say mga tao na nagre-rely sa gambling to what's the word? Siguro to relieve their stress. And at some point, meron ng mga stories na narinig from my friends and from my colleagues, ganyan, na maybe their parents or their relatives relied on gambling to relieve stress from work and from all of that, or sex even to relieve stress and problems to escape their problems. Pero hindi natin siguro masasabi na ang hirap kasi sabihin na ang hirap sabihin na they are not thinking, because these are ways that people cope or people think they should do to survive and to take a break from a problem for a second, ganyan. Pero of course, hindi ko naman pinagtatanggol na dapat natin gawin tong gambling or unsafe sex or to drugs or to drink para lang ma-resolve or para lang mag-take a break sa mga problems natin. Pero let's not antagonize the people that use these coping mechanisms, because we should understand or think about how they kung bakit nag-lead, kung ano ba yung mga events na nag-lead sa ganitong type ng coping mechanism na meron sila. So, last dito sa mga types ng maladaptive coping mechanisms is self-harm. People may engage in self-harming behaviors to cope with extreme stress or trauma. I will not tackle self-harm because it is triggering for people. So let's just say that if you cope with your problems through self-harm, we are here for you, and if you need a support system, we will be here for you, and you can message us anytime. Ayun, let's not talk about self-harm ng malalim in this episode because it will be triggering for people. We will move on to the next point in this episode, which is my experiences with coping mechanisms overall. Siguro over the years, I have experienced dealing with stress using these coping mechanisms, and then at some point in my life, parang nag-decide ako na itigil tong mga coping mechanisms na to because I was getting dependable in those toxic, or maybe nagiging toxic na yung mga coping mechanisms na yun para sa akin. And sa tingin ko, mahirap kasi na sabihin na itigil na lang agad eh. Lalo na pag over the years you have it has been your safe space, ganyan, over the years. And mahirap sabihin na maghanap ka na ng ibang coping mechanism, ganyan. Mahirap kasi sabihin yun sa mga tao, lalo na nasanay na tayo na this is the way that we deal with life and all of the shit that is happening sa buhay natin, ganyan. And hindi natin agad parang mababago itong mga coping mechanisms na to kahit gaano pa natin sabihin sa sarili natin na this is toxic, you have to change, ganyan. Mahirap sabihin sa sarili natin na magbago agad, and mas lalong mahirap sabihin sa mga ibang tao na tigilan nila itong mga coping mechanisms na to. And ayun, parang siguro, of course, we are looking after these people, pero we have to take in consideration na they have been using this type of coping mechanisms for years siguro, na they have grown dependent on these types of coping mechanisms, kahit toxic man yan or healthy. These coping mechanisms help us to relieve stress. And siguro para sa akin, we do these coping mechanisms to take a break from finding the solution to our problem. Pero I guess I can say na these coping mechanisms can be toxic kapag we do not use it to take a break from our problems, but to run away from our problems. And running away from our problems will cause more problems, and we will use these coping mechanisms again to run away from those problems, and then it is just a cycle na padami yung problema mo hanggang sa wala na. Parang mahirapan ka na to solve the problem or the main problem overall because ayun nga, tinakasan mo siya using these coping mechanisms. Anyway, so lastly, what do I think about coping mechanisms? Personally, and genuinely, I think we need coping mechanisms, of course. We need coping mechanisms to survive. We need coping mechanisms to survive, of course. And I personally believe that coping mechanisms help, lalo na in my experiences with using coping mechanisms to take a break from my problems, and in taking a break to in solving or trying to solve my problems. Pero syempre, I have learned the hard way, and I think we all have learned the hard way that some coping mechanisms are just toxic for us, even if it relieves us for a second. Syempre, di ba, hindi naman natin pwedeng sabihin, or hindi naman tayo pwedeng mag-rely lang sa mga coping mechanisms na to get by in the unexpected events that the universe or life throws at us. Siguro, masasabi ko lang sa coping mechanisms is that we need coping mechanisms, of course. Pero, we don't need coping mechanisms to distract us or to help us run away from our problems. We need coping mechanisms to help us take a break and to release the stress that we have because of these problems and to help us think of a way to solve these problems, hopefully. So, I think that is it for today's episodes. So, our social media accounts are open anytime you want to talk to us. Our social media is at DevSR Podcast in both Instagram and Twitter. You can contact us anytime at all and open din yung comment section sa baba if you ever need anything to say or you want someone to talk to. Ano pa ba? This is the 5th episode of our podcast, and if you want to binge watch our podcast or if you want to binge listen to our podcast even, the link will be up para sa playlist ng mga episodes na na-release na namin before. And if you have watched or listened to those episodes, thank you so much. And I'm hoping na makasama ka pa namin sa mga iba pang episodes or sa mga susunod pang episodes in the future. So, mag-subscribe ka na lang dyan sa baba if you want to be notified every time that we post. So, of course, we just want to remind you guys that we post every first and third Friday of the month. And kung gusto nyo lang naman na mag-catch up with us, abangan nyo na lang yung mga susunod pa naming episodes, and we hope that you enjoy it as much as we do. So that is it for today's episode. Again, I am your host, Mao, and always remember, you'll never know what you'll get from the Devil's Art. Bye! See you next episode, guys!